Tonight on Bridge City News, Lethbridge police need our help solving a couple of cold cases. One involves the disappearance of a woman from 1980. Farmers and ranchers in Fort Macleod received some good news today with the arrival of a new card lock. And recovery efforts are underway in northern and southern California as fire officials look for more bodies from those who died in the devastating wildfires. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Lethbridge police need our help in solving a couple of cold cases. Julie DeRuin and Theodore Milda have been missing for decades, and their cases have gone cold. Police do not want to close the cases until they know exactly what happened. Julie was just 23 when she went missing on New Year's Day of 1980. Today, she would be 59. Theodore Milda was reported missing in February of 93 after a friend found a note along with his keys inside of a mailbox. It appears as though Milda took his own life, but a body was never recovered. Lethbridge Police Acting Staff Sergeant Mark Smallbone says cold cases can be a real challenge.
Just the time and distance, because the longer it takes, memories start to fade. Evidence obviously deteriorates, and some of them get that long that some witnesses end up moving on as well. So lots of different things that can bring some roadblocks to that.
If you have any information that may help police in their investigation, call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. One man is dead and two others were sent to hospital after a truck rolled over near Drumheller earlier today. Police say the accident occurred early this morning on Highway 576 near Range Road 184. The driver of the truck lost control on the icy road and hit the ditch. One male passenger died at the scene, and the other was flown by Stars Air ambulance to Calgary with life-threatening injuries. The driver of the truck went to hospital with minor injuries. The accident remains under investigation. Winter driving can be treacherous at the best of times. Wayne McLaughlin is the chief driving instructor with the Alberta Motor Association, and he says poor road conditions isn't the only factor which causes accidents.
If you don't have enough space, you don't have enough time. So oftentimes it's poor preparation in that regard. Drivers don't leave enough space when they prepare to stop for a stopping distance. They don't leave enough following distance in case there's some issues with the vehicle ahead of them. And so they don't have time to react or to move out of the road.
Catch my tire interview with Mr. McLaughlin as we discuss the best ways of keeping you and your family safe on the roads this winter. That's coming up after business news. It was an exciting day for farmers in Fort Macleod. As Josie Foster explains, the long-awaited UFA card lock officially opened.
The United Farmers of Alberta opened new doors to the Fort Macleod Petroleum Card Lock Agency today. The new station is located at the southwest junction of Highways 2 and 3, a convenient location for farmers and truckers alike.
Close to the auction market, close to an intersection of two major highways.
They've always called Southern Alberta, Fort Macleod, the crossroad of Canada's cattle country.
Yeah, there's so many small communities, they lose businesses, and it's just nice to see UFA thinking ahead and putting up a new business.
A new office and lubricant warehouse are also located on site, giving the manager a step up from where he served his customers for the past 25 years.
And we're very happy with the manager here too. He's done it for years. Hope he can continue for years.
The 5-product petroleum agency offers 2 types of gas and diesel, plus a satellite dispenser for clear and dyed diesel.
Big truck can come in and they can fill on one side of their truck with a fast pump and go over to the other side and fill from the other side with just as fast a pump.
Card lock access isn't limited to members, but becoming a member does open you to possibilities within the community.
Membership in UFA is ownership in your cooperative. When you become a member, if you patronize UFA enough, if you buy enough things, you can gain the right to vote and vote for your local delegate to voice concerns, things you like, things you may like to see different at UFA.
The new UFA Petroleum Agency is now open for business at 865 14th Street in Fort Macleod, Alberta. For Bridge City News, I'm Josie Foster.
Lethbridge residents are being asked for their input on social issues affecting our city. SACPA, otherwise known as the Council on Public Affairs, brought in speakers to discuss the biggest issues impacting Lethbridge. The speakers were comprised of consultants and local business professionals who wanted to share what some of their biggest concerns were.
Any kind of report that is a strategic plan that community is going to buy into needs broad community consultation. And so our plan is to talk to people in many different forums, and SACPA is a great forum to have good conversations. The goal today is to hear what people think the issues are, and not to come in with preconceived ideas.
Obviously, there's not going to be any surprises that housing affordability and homelessness are a challenge here, mental health and addictions are another one, perception of public safety, as well as access to services and knowing where to go for help.
There's lots of talk in the community, and I think we know for all of us personally some of the things that we're seeing. We can't make any assumptions. We need to actually validate the reality of the business owner on the street, the reality of a person living in the shelter, the reality of the service provider who's trying to help vulnerable people, whether it be the soup kitchen or the food bank. So we're talking to all those people, but it's really important to us that the community at large has an opportunity to have their say as well, so that every perspective is included.
The Angel Tree Christmas campaign celebrated their 26th annual launch at St. Teresa of Calcutta Elementary School today. Many dignitaries were on hand, including Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman. The goal of the campaign is to ensure every child receives a gift this Christmas season. CEO of Lethbridge Family Services, Sandra Mintz, says the growth of people's hearts and businesses have really helped.
We partner currently with 103 businesses and schools and loads of private individuals who donate gifts, donate cash. Last year we were able to provide gift bundles for 2,294 kids.
First Choice Savings in Lethbridge has been involved in this since 2002, 16th year this year. We're a local credit union, and we believe in supporting local initiatives, and this is a great one to help all the children in the Lethbridge area make sure they get something at Christmas.
In addition to a $5,000 donation made by the credit union, toy and cash donations are also being accepted at various branches. As the Christmas shopping season approaches, the City of Lethbridge is offering free parking downtown on 2 Fridays. The first will be this Friday to coincide with the Bright Lights Festival, and the second will be on December 7th. Those trying to pay the Way to Park app or on-street meters will be notified that payment will not be required on those 2 days. The city is also introducing new prepaid parking cards for those who don't own a credit card. They're available at City Hall and can be loaded with any dollar amount. While many in Alberta believe Calgary said no to the 2026 Winter Games because of the economics in the city, a political analyst with Mount Royal University says it was so much more than that. David Tarr says Calgarians do not want to be associated with the International Olympic Committee's tarnished brand. He says previous corruption and doping scandals have soured some people on the Games. Calgary voters rejected bidding for the Games by a margin of just over 56%. January 2019 will be a very special month for artists in our province. Minister of Culture and Tourism Ricardo Miranda has dubbed January as the first ever Month of the Artist. It'll become an annual celebration for artists and the value they bring to the province both socially and economically. According to Stats Canada, Alberta's artists contribute $1.3 billion to the economy in 2016. Albertans spent an average of $4,112 per household on culture and recreation goods. That is $632 higher than the national average each year. There are still people in Fort McMurray waiting for their homes to be rebuilt 2.5 years after the 2016 wildfire. Most were living in a 214-unit townhouse condo development that burned down and which is now embroiled in legal disputes. Some of the owners are facing bankruptcy, foreclosures, and mental health problems. To help them out, the city, the Alberta government, and the Red Cross have pitched in with $6 million for interim housing and special assessment fees during the rebuild process. A woman in Newfoundland says her heart is heavy after learning her aunt and uncle died in the wildfire that destroyed the Northern California town of Paradise last week. Megan Janes had launched a massive social media search trying to find Paula and Randy Dodge. The fire has destroyed tens of thousands of homes. At least 56 people are now known dead in the massive Northern California wildfire. Authorities say 130 others are still unaccounted for.
Today, during the course of our search, an additional 8 human remains were recovered. That brings the total up to 56. All 8 of those human remains were found in the Paradise area. 6 were found inside structures. 2 were found outside of structures. Of the 56 human remains that we have tentatively identified 47 of them. We have been able to locate or determine that over 200 people that we thought were missing or weren't accounted for are not. I think that's a pretty positive number. As of tonight, we currently have 130 people on our unaccounted for list. So today we brought in an additional 287 search and rescue personnel to assist with ground searches.
As firefighters battle blazes in Northern California, 3 people are now known dead from the Woolsey fire in the southern part of the state. A burned body was removed from the rubble of an incinerated home yesterday.
What brought us there was some neighbors concerned that they hadn't seen the resident after the evacuations, and then when they were allowed to return, they discovered the house burned down. They also discovered that both of his cars were there.
It's very sad, it really is. It just feels so bad that we weren't able to, go and check on him and help.
He may have been just outside or inside the house. The way the roof collapsed, it's very hard to tell exactly what was going on at the time, but we don't know if he just wasn't able to leave or if he just chose not to leave.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says trade and human rights talks go hand in hand, and China is no exception. The PM says he highlighted concerns for some of China's minority Uyghur population in his bilateral meeting with Chinese leaders.
Canada has always been unequivocal about standing up for human rights around the world. This is something that we do at the same time as we engage in constructive and positive trade talks. In my time as a leader and Prime Minister, I have always talked about human rights concerns at the same time as we've talked about economic opportunities and partnerships. That is what Canadians expect of me, and that certainly is the situation of the Uyghurs in China has been no exception. I highlighted the questions and the concerns that we have around the Uyghur population when I sat down with Premier Lee in our bilateral, and Canada will continue to look for ways to advance and promote human rights in partnership with our like-minded allies.
By early next year, the first foods made from gene-edited plants are expected to begin selling. It is very different from today's controversial genetically modified foods. As we hear and see in this next report, some critics, however, say gene-edited products still need close monitoring.
These cows in California were spared a painful procedure.
Dairy cows, like Holsteins, grow horns, and they're quite dangerous for human workers and also for their fellow cows, and so they're normally manually removed.
Instead, scientists genetically remove their horns through gene editing.
It's kind of a pair of molecular scissors, if you will, that you can tell to go and cut the DNA at a very precise location in the genome. And what that enables you to do is go in and very precisely alter one particular gene of the thousands of genes that make up the genome, and you can introduce useful genetic variations.
Variations like soybeans edited to grow with more heart-healthy fat, or mushrooms that don't brown. It sounds like GMOs are genetically modified foods, but it isn't.
A lot of the consumer resistance to accepting GMO technology is that we're moving foreign genes from other organisms. Using genome editing, what we're doing is changing the sequence of the DNA in the plant, the natural sequence itself. Fruit's already coming down.
Fred Gamitter hopes gene editing will help save Florida's citrus industry.
See very small leaves.
It's being devastated by a disease called citrus greening.
For Florida, it has cut our production from about 240 million boxes, maybe 15 to 18 years ago, down to 45 million boxes in the last season.
Despite its promise, some critics are concerned about how gene-edited foods will be regulated.
I think the vast majority of the products will be safe, but somebody needs to be looking out for those cases where a mishap may happen or the developer of the product may miss some important health or environmental consequence.
U.S. agriculture officials say no new rules are needed for plants that could have been developed through more traditional methods, clearing the way for about 24 gene-edited crops so far. That includes the heart-healthier soybean oil. Products made with it will likely hit grocery stores next year. But officials are debating how animal-based products will be regulated. Kathy Young, Associated Press.
Another mild day today and not as windy. Unfortunately, cooler temperatures and some of the white stuff is on the way. Complete weather details are coming up. Lots of sunshine and warm again today. A low-pressure system moves in tonight, bringing rain mixed with snow and a low near -6. Tomorrow, good chance of flurries again with the temperature remaining steady at -6. Saturday, the clouds should clear with the temperature warming up to 0. Sunday, more sunshine on the way with a high of +1. Monday, even warmer with a sunny sky and a high of 5. Tuesday, the mercury will climb all the way up to 13 degrees. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 4 degrees and an average low of -7. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1995 at 19 degrees, and the record low was -26 in 1959. Sunrise was at 7:43, sunset at 4:49. Let's have a look at how tomorrow's shaping up across the country. More rain is in the forecast for Vancouver with a high near 12 expected. Pretty much the same picture in Victoria. A good chance of flurries and only -7 for Calgary on Friday. Edmonton will be even cooler with a good chance of snow and a high of only -11. Clearing in Regina at -12. A mixture of sun and cloud in Saskatoon with a high near -13 expected. Winnipeg will be mainly cloudy and -6 on Friday. Toronto will have periods of rain mixed with snow and a high of 3 degrees. Ottawa will also receive some snow and +1. Montreal had a snowfall warning today. More snow on tap tomorrow with a high near -1 expected. Over the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have heavy snow mixed with ice pellets and should see a high of 0. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have rain and 6. Charlottetown, PEI will have snow mixed with ice pellets and +1. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, they had a storm surge warning today, clearing tomorrow with a high near -2. The union representing over 50,000 postal workers is looking over a time-limited contract offer delivered yesterday by Canada Post. The Crown Corporation says with online holiday sales set to ramp up, the deadline to accept the offer is this Saturday. Canada Post hopes its 4-year contract offer, it says, is worth $650 million, will bring an end to the 3 weeks of rotating strikes that has created a backlog of undelivered packages. The proposal offers annual 2% wage hikes, a signing bonus, new job security provisions, and a $10 million health and safety fund. A strike has been averted at the Globe and Mail just hours before the deadline. The union, representing 320 employees, including reporters and editors, says the two sides reached a tentative agreement. Unifor said it was seeking pension protection and an end to an alleged pay gap between the Globe's male and female employees. The two sides had spent the last 6 months negotiating. Walmart's U.S. chief says customers want both online and hands-on store experiences this Christmas shopping season. Some smaller retailers are embracing this same strategy.
In the race for your holiday dollars,
insert your card here. It has a chip on it.
Big box retailers and small businesses are giving shoppers more reasons and ways to spend their money.
There's no doubt that anything that you can do that takes friction out for a customer is a good win.
The less friction, the easier it is for shoppers like Sylvia Rosas to make a purchase.
It gets me to what I want faster.
She used a Walmart smartphone app to find gifts for her children in the newly expanded toy section.
How much it is, how much can I get it for here online and then on the store.
Walmart is betting big on technology this holiday season. Greg Foran, the CEO of Walmart US, gave the AP an exclusive tour of one of its technology-forward stores in Houston and showed just how fast they can restock inventory. Scanning robots help the retail giant keep tabs of what's on or not on its shelves in real time. Foran says this helps put employees in front of customers, so they can pay directly and skip lines. And if that's too much of a hassle, there are pickup kiosks.
They're going to want you to be able to provide an experience for them which is completely seamless. And at times they're going to come to the store to shop, other times they're going to order online.
The same strategy applies for this small business owner.
It's just all sorts of fun stuff that locals and tourists love to buy.
Beatrix Bell is trying to provide her customers the in-store and online experience.
When you go to an e-commerce website that is managed by the actual artist, you are getting personalized service, just as if you'd come into the gift shop and buy it in real life.
The New Orleans jewelry designer geared up for the holidays over the summer by stocking up on inventory.
Amazon's taking a cut from everyone, and you just have to be creative and think outside of the box and come up with new ways to reach customers.
Creativity and convenience.
And I'm excited to be standing here with you and just seeing how many customers are actually in our aisle down here shopping.
Something both small and big retailers know they need for a successful holiday season. John Moan, Associated Press, Houston.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, United Farmers of Alberta unveiled the opening of a new UFA Petroleum cardlock agency in Fort Macleod. The new location will offer gas, diesel, and feature new high-speed lanes. It'll also include a new office, lubricant warehouse, and propane will also be made available. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. One of our Ottawa contributors, Brian Lilly, says we shouldn't drink the Kool-Aid Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is serving in regards to how much money we'll get back when it comes to the Fed's carbon tax. Brian has details next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come and enjoy a Victorian Prairie Christmas on Friday, November 16th from 1 to 4 p.m. at Galt Historic Railway Park near Sterling, Alberta. Experience an 1890s Christmas setting with entertainment, food, and Victorian Christmas pudding. Cost is $20 per person or $18 per person for a group of 5 or more. To reserve your spot, call Pat at 403-394-9434. The 4th annual Pig Roast fundraiser in support of the construction of a medical clinic in Uganda is taking place Saturday, November 17th at the Miss City Church, with doors opening at 5 p.m., supper and program beginning at 5:30. Tickets are $15 and can be reserved by calling Anne at the Bridges of Hope office at 403-380-3844. Volunteer Lethbridge is looking for individuals and groups to support them at their annual holiday gift wrapping fundraiser at Park Place Shopping Centre during November and December. Come for this fun and festive opportunity to help Volunteer Lethbridge's activities and services in the community. Orientation will be provided. For more information, call Chelsea at 403-332-4320. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The Trudeau Liberals are saying once you factor in all of the rebates when it comes to the carbon tax, you'll actually be getting more than what you pay. Now, one of our Ottawa contributors, Brian Lilly, does not necessarily agree with that. Brian joins me now via Skype. Brian, once you factor in the direct and indirect costs, we're actually paying more?
Well, it depends on where you live and what your living situation is, what your household is like, Hal. But, out there in Alberta where you are, you're not going to be paying the Trudeau backstop carbon tax. Not just yet, you're going to be dealing with your own provincial tax unless the government changes hands next spring, in which case Jason Kenney says he'll scrap the Notley carbon tax, at which point Justin Trudeau says he'll bring in his. But the biggest province that they're fighting with right now is Ontario. Yes, Saskatchewan's on board. Manitoba is opposed to the Trudeau plan, not New Brunswick. And the Trudeau Liberals have promised to bring in their federal backstop on all of these. And they say, don't worry, you'll pay about $260 in the carbon tax in direct costs, but you'll get back $318. And by the 4th year, it'll be $657 you'll pay, and you'll get back $718. So don't worry, you'll get back more than you pay directly. Now, this is the key word here, is they keep using that. You'll get back more than you pay directly. And that's for most families. Now, why does this matter? Because if you live in a province where the federal backstop comes in, and again, could be Alberta as of next summer, well, they're going to determine how much you get back, not based on what you use, but based on Canadian averages. And, I looked up some of what these are, and let's put it this way. If you're a 2-car household that lives in the suburbs and you've got to commute to work and then you got to drive home and you got to get your kids to hockey practice or soccer practice or swimming lessons or dance lessons or band or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to pay more because the average Canadian vehicle travels 15,400 kilometers a year. I can't remember the last time I drove that little in a year. And most suburban families, most rural families, drive more than that. Now, they promise a little bit of a top-up for rural families, but I don't think it's going to cover the costs. So you've got to drive, basically, if you're somebody that lives in downtown Calgary, downtown Vancouver, downtown Toronto or Montreal, you live in a small apartment, you walk to work or you take the subway, you're going to be fine. But if you are your typical suburban family, you're going to be paying more, not only in direct costs, but the indirect costs. And what do I mean by that? Well, indirect costs are how much does the price of your food go up? I haven't even gotten to the GST yet. I'll get to that in a moment. There was a professor at the University of Ottawa who looked at when the carbon tax is $30 a ton, he estimated that the price of food would go up by 1.2%. The average Canadian household spends about $8,700 a year on food. That works out to about an extra $105 a year in terms of food costs. Well, that doesn't account for the increase in cost for your clothing, for anything else that you buy, because anything that moves by car or truck is going to go up. And by the way, we've recently found out the feds are going to be charging GST on top of this. They say it's not going to be significant, but in the first year, in this year, they expect to be getting about $264 million. That'll be over $1 billion a year extra by the time this tax is fully implemented.
Brian, the feds have announced more money to tackle the gang and gun violence in our country. I mean, things are really bad in cities like Toronto, where they've had more than 80 homicides so far this year. Many agree it's good, except when it comes to the controversial Bill C-71, which it argues that it attacks responsible gun owners. Tory MP Michelle Rempel is sponsoring an online petition against the bill, which has now gathered more than 25,000 signatures.
Yeah, and on top of that, they're still examining this idea of a handgun ban. Look, I applaud the Liberals, I really do, for putting about $80+ million into guns and gangs. It's split between the RCMP and different police forces to tackle gang and gun issues, plus tens of millions of dollars going towards the Canada Border Services Agency to intercept illegal handguns coming into the country, or illegal guns, period. Most of what we know are used in illegal crimes. The crime guns are mostly handguns. Most of the murders that were caused by guns were handguns used by gangs. This is from Stats Canada. This is not from me. So I applaud them for putting more money into the Canada Border Services Agency. They recently caught, I don't know if you heard this story, Hal, but coming across the border between Buffalo, New York, and Fort Erie, Ontario, they found a woman with 25 handguns wrapped in plastic, stored in her gas tank. Wow. When they raided the home associated with her and her friends and associates, they found another 5 handguns. They found quantities of cocaine, marijuana, ammunition, and loads of cash, because that's where these illegal guns are going to. So we want to support the Canada Border Services Agency. We want to support the RCMP in stopping this, because we have a crime problem. But unfortunately, Bill C-71 that you mentioned, it doesn't do anything to tackle gangs and guns. It increases paperwork for law-abiding gun owners. And I don't know how forcing a target shooter that wants to go to the range out in Calgary, or the duck hunter or the deer hunter that wants to go on an outfitting tour in Saskatchewan, actually stops gun crime in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, or here in Ottawa, where we've had 68 shootings this year. We're on to record territory, and we haven't even hit the end of the year. It doesn't tackle that. And then on the gun ban, the handgun ban, they keep claiming, well, 50% of guns used in crimes come from domestic sources. It used to be all from the United States, now half come from Canada. I've been asking for sources on this for months. Others have been asking. A researcher from Airdrie, Alberta, just outside of Calgary, Dennis Young, asked Public Safety Canada to provide any records to back up Minister Goodale's claim. They said after a thorough search, we found nothing. So if they had partial records, they would have to release that. They found nothing, which means the minister's own department has no data to back up Ralph Goodale's claim.
Brian, a story which recently came up about voter ID cards that were sent to dead people and non-citizens in the last election. Apparently, our Prime Minister wants to add millions more to the voters list coming up with the next federal election next fall.
Yeah, let me give you the 3 big numbers out of this: 57,000, 207,000, and 2 million. Now, 57,000, that's roughly the number of non-citizens that were sent voter information cards in the last election. 207,000, that's the number of people who were deceased that they know of that were sent voter information cards in the last election. Some of these people actually voted, Hal, and that has to be worrisome, but it doesn't appear to bother Elections Canada or the current government. Elections Canada has admitted, due to a story that came out of Vancouver related to their referendum on whether to adopt proportional representation, Elections Canada admitted it's an honor system when it comes to non-citizens voting. And as far as that voter information card, the Harper Conservative said, You know what? That's not a valid piece of ID. There are way too many problems. And in fact, when you tally up the number of dead people, the number of non-citizens, the number of non-deliverable voter information cards, the numbers of cards with incorrect data on it, we're well over 1 million. And it starts to get worrisome. But Trudeau and the Liberals want to make this a valid piece of ID for you to vote in the next election. So let's say one shows up at your house and it's for a dead guy. Well, you can take that, and if the guy used to live at your house and you got a bill, well, maybe you can use that to convince them to allow you to vote. I don't think that that's a good idea, and a lot of Canadians are worried about that. Now, the 2 million number, that's the number of people who have left Canada because, well, they emigrated. They left the country. And Justin Trudeau thinks that they should be allowed to vote, even if they have left and haven't returned in decades. Think of Neil Young. You know, he shows up for concerts. He doesn't live here. Donald Sutherland, the actor, they both moved to Hollywood in the 1960s. Yeah, they're Canadians, but should they really be casting a ballot here? They don't have an address here. They don't have a place to live. They don't have a riding to belong to. 2 million foreign Canadians could cast ballots in the next election. That's more than the entirety of the ballots cast in all 4 Atlantic provinces in 2015.
Brian, Stats Canada was apparently not forthcoming about the data grab they planned for Canadians. Tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, you and I have talked about this idea that Stats Canada says they need to take your banking info. And Hal, if they don't have your banking info and your wife's banking info and your kids' banking info and your dog's banking info, then they can't help the government plan good social programs for the future. So they need to take it, and they need to take it without your consent. Well, part of what their defense has been all along is we're working with the Privacy Commissioner. Don't worry, we're on board with the Privacy Commissioner. They know what we're doing here, and they're okay with it. Well, the Privacy Commissioner appeared before the Senate just last week. He appeared before a Senate committee and said, actually, I didn't know how broad this was until the news broke in the media. And at first, the reports were it was going to be 500,000 Canadians. Well, now we've learned it's 500,000 households. When pressed, Anil LaRosa, who's the chief statistician, said, yeah, that's about 3 people per household is the Canadian average. So we're talking close to 1.5 million Canadians. Stats Canada was not forthcoming. They weren't upfront with the Privacy Commissioner, and that should worry everyone. Let me just read off a couple of stats here. A poll by Nanos Research found that 55% of Canadians oppose this idea. Another 19% somewhat opposed. So we're talking 64% oppose or somewhat opposed, compared to just 9% that support it and 14% that somewhat support it. 3% say, I don't know, I'm not sure. But the overwhelming majority of Canadians say they don't like this idea. And quite frankly, I don't blame them.
I don't either. Tory Stafford's killer, Terri Lynn McClintock, has been moved from the Saskatchewan Healing Lodge back to prison. And Brian, you say our Prime Minister owes Canadians an apology here.
He really does, because, you know, he could have simply said, look, this is under review. The Minister of Public Safety is looking into this matter, and we will report back to Parliament. And that's what's happened in a couple of recent cases. I have to give credit to Veterans Affairs Minister Seamus O'Regan. When he's faced some outrageous news articles about what's happened with Veterans Affairs and how veterans haven't been treated properly, he says, look, I'm kind of upset by this as well, but I've asked my officials for data. I've asked them for information. I'll get back to you. Well, that's the responsible thing to do. What the Prime Minister did for weeks under questioning by the opposition, Hal, was stand up and say, this is under review by the Minister of Public Safety, but those people over there asking questions don't respect the rule of law. He actually accused the Conservatives and all Canadians that were questioning this, he accused them of not respecting the rule of law, not respecting the judiciary. He used the term ambulance chasers and insulted people left, right, and center for weeks on this. So now that the government has changed the rules, and when you and I spoke last, we weren't sure that this was going to apply to Terri Lynn McClintock. And then shortly after the broadcast, it came out that, yes, it would. Originally, the government had said this will apply to cases going forward, that, you know, for any new cases. So it didn't seem that they were going to apply this to McClintock. It seemed that they were going to let her stay in the Healing Lodge. And then shortly after the broadcast, it was announced She had actually been transferred to the Edmonton Women's Institution. Well, that means that they did what Canadians and the opposition and so many people asked them to do. Don't they owe Canadians an apology for all the names that they hurled at them over the weeks leading up to this decision?
Now, speaking of our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau defends freedom of the press in Paris recently. Then Finance Minister Bill Morneau gives a speech in China where reporters were banned.
Yeah, look, so much of what this government does right now is aimed at taking pot shots at the Ontario government of Doug Ford or the American government of Donald Trump. And so Justin Trudeau is speaking to a group called Reporters Without Borders in Paris while he was there for the Peace Summit and the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. And he's speaking to them, and he talks about the need for an independent, free-thinking media, that this is vitally important to democracy, that we've got a free press. Well, okay, that's good, but we know why he was saying that because of the back and forth with Jim Acosta of CNN, who had his press pass revoked by the White House. And by the way, he had it revoked after asking the president 4 questions. And when the president said, "That's enough, I'm done, I'm moving on," and an intern tried to grab the mic, Acosta wouldn't and tried to, keep the mic away from her. And so they said, "You're not acting properly, we're taking the press pass away." That comment by Trudeau was a shot at Trump over that issue. That's fine. But Justin Trudeau has blocked questions from entire media companies because he didn't like the comments of one columnist. He did that in the past. You and I know well about that. He has blocked media from asking questions he didn't like. And then immediately after these comments in Paris, Bill Morneau is in China. He's speaking at the Canada-China Business Council, and journalists are blocked, not because of the government of Canada anyway, but because the Chinese government didn't want them there. Given that the government had just said, that the leader of the government had just said this, that is, beyond the pale. I get that there are times when speeches and comments are behind closed doors and off the records, and all governments have the ability to do that. But for you to stand up and say, "I believe in a free press, but I'm going to allow China to block reporters from reporting on what a Canadian official says in China," no, that's not on.
Brian, we only have a few short moments left here. Canada Post strike continues, and now the delays are hurting online retailers leading up to the busy Christmas shopping season.
Yeah, and so Canada Post has given a limited time offer to the posties and said, look, we'll give you a 2% per year increase. We will give you a $1,000 per year signing bonus, a $10 million health and safety fund, but you've got to sign on soon, because if not, we are going to miss the lucrative online Christmas shopping season, and that will hurt Canada Post, and that will hurt their bottom line, and they will not be able to offer anything more. So it would be wise of the posties to say, you know what, we better get back on the job, we better stop these rotating strikes, or we're not going to get the kind of contract offer that we want. $1,000 a year, $1,000 per employee signing bonus plus raises every year. Plenty of Canadians would be willing to sign on for that, Hal. I know I'm one.
Yeah, sign me up as well. Our Ottawa contributor, Brian Lilly, joining me once again via Skype. Thanks a lot, Brian.
Thank you.
Many of us dread the winter driving season. It can be quite tricky, but there's some common sense driving tips and precautions that'll save you a lot of grief. Joining me now in studio is Wayne McLaughlin, the Chief Driving Instructor with the Alberta Motor Association. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
Now, do you have any stats on how many accidents occur in the winter as opposed to spring, summer, and fall?
Well, it's interesting, not in terms of numbers, but percentage-wise. In 2016, for example, 70% roughly of collisions occurred on dry roads,
wow,
which leaves a smaller percentage that would occur in ice, slush, and snow, that sort of thing.
Is that thanks to distracted driving, perhaps? Maybe texting or curling your hair, eating a burger?
Well, I think it could be a combination of things, but I think the biggest thing is that most people prepare better for slippery roads. They know it's bound to happen, so they're a little bit more cautious.
Now, when it comes to winter driving, do you think sometimes when we have a 4x4 and all-wheel drive, it gives us a false sense of security?
I believe that can be the case for sure. Four-wheel drives are great if you're trying to get out of a situation where maybe you're stuck in the snow or
you end up in the ditch,
or in the ditch and want to get back out.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I mean, you still have those 4 tires on the road. And if you're in four-wheel drive, you actually have 4 wheels pulling the vehicle as compared to 2. So you still can wind up with the same problems of not being able to stop in time or coming into a corner too fast, which can result in going into the ditch or worse.
So what do you think contributes to a lot of winter driving accidents? Is it speed?
Well, speed can be a factor. I always think if you don't have enough space, you don't have enough time. So oftentimes it's poor preparation in that regard. Drivers don't leave enough space when they prepare to stop for stopping distance. They don't leave enough following distance in case there's some issues with the vehicle ahead of them. And so they don't have time to react or to move out of the road.
I'm glad you brought that up. Tailgating is a real issue, and it's a danger for both parties involved.
Well, it is. Sometimes people maybe are following too closely and don't really realize the danger of it. It's more of a lack of awareness as opposed to deliberately following somebody too close because they're not happy with the speed they're driving at. But regardless of the reason, it's still a high-risk situation for sure.
So refresh my memory, Wayne, is it a 2-second or 3-second gap, like 1/1000, 2/1000 when you're behind a vehicle?
Well, if you look at the manual, it says 2. We prefer to say 3 because it gives you a little bit more time to deal with any issues. And of course, if you're driving on snow and ice, any adverse road condition, you always want to think about maybe moving further back, maybe even thinking about doubling that following distance if you can.
How often do you see drivers in the left-hand lane turning into the right-hand lane and right-hand lane turning into the left-hand lane instead of left, left, right, right? That drives me nuts. You see that a lot of times? It's like, and then they want to try and slingshot past you.
Yeah.
Shake and bake. It's almost like a Talladega Nights, right? Like, this isn't Hollywood, buddy. Slow down.
Well, it's there is a proper procedure that should be followed, and turning into the correct lane, whether you're turning right or left, is always the best thing to do. Although it's not the most common thing that you see out there, as you mentioned.
How about when it comes to skidding? Skidding, especially on icy roads. You turn into the skid, away from the skid. How does that work?
Yes, well, you want to look and steer in the direction you want the vehicle to go. So if your back end is sliding out to your right, you would steer to the right and that sort of thing. So formula basically is off the gas, stay off the brake, look and steer in the direction you want your vehicle to go.
A lot of people that come visit me from Southern Ontario are amazed at our beautiful coulees here in Lethbridge and the rolling hills. They're like, I thought it was all flat here in Alberta. I said, no, it's not flat here. So what advice would you give to people coming to Southern Alberta? And we've got these beautiful rolling hills and winter driving. A lot of steep hills here. It can be dangerous.
Well, you certainly have a few in the city of Lethbridge. And so basically, if you're coming to a situation, kind of good idea to kind of get to know what your road surface is like, if you've had freezing rain or maybe a thaw and then freezing again. So
that black ice, right?
That black ice. So ideally, as you're approaching a hill like that, reduce your speed before you get there. And then maybe before you get there as well, shift down. Maybe if you're driving an automatic, down into second, or manual transmission, just gear down. And then you can let the engine braking sort of help control your speed so you don't have to physically brake the car, which would probably cause the tires to break free, and now you're going into some kind of a skid going downhill.
My hometown is Calgary. Born and raised in Calgary. We're used to a lot of the Chinooks, and we're getting beautiful Chinooks in Lethbridge as well. Environment Canada says we'll have El Nino making quite the appearance throughout the wintertime, which is nice, warmer temperatures. Now, when that happens, is it still important to get winter tires?
Well, it's a good idea to realize that we can't really predict exactly what the weather is going to do. So if generally we're dealing with snow at some point. So we do recommend winter tires because it does help you deal with a variety of those situations, including snow and slush and when the road gets icy. So winter tires will always give you more traction, adhere better to the road because of the softer rubber composition.
Yeah, make sure you take those off in the summertime because they'll wear down in a hurry, won't they?
They will.
Last year, maybe one winter, one summer, and that's it after that. How about tire pressure? How important is that to have proper control of your vehicle when you're driving?
Well, tire pressure is important. If you have properly inflated tires, you only have a patch of rubber about the size of the palm of your hand, all 4 of those on the road. So if you have overinflated tires, you're going to be riding on the centerpiece. And if they're underinflated, you're going to be riding on the outside edges of the tires. So you're not going to get good tire wear, plus you don't have that same amount of rubber contacting the road.
In the wintertime, you've got a lot of snowplows out there and sanding trucks. And sometimes, I've been guilty of this myself, being a little impatient. You're stuck behind them and you've got the rocks flying up. You want to pass them. So let's talk about how important patience is to protect yourself and your family.
Well, it's true. You know, when you're following that sanding truck or that plow on the highway, they're going to be kicking up a cloud of snow and probably some other debris off the road. So you want to stay back at least a recommended distance that the sign on the plow might tell you to stay back. And if you decide to pass, always make sure you have a clear sight line for oncoming traffic. And always good to keep in mind as well that plows will generally pull over every 8 to 12 kilometers to let traffic go by.
When you've got a police car ahead of you or an emergency vehicle ahead of you on the side of the road, it's always important to move over to the left-hand lane, isn't it? And not pass them in the right-hand lane. Give them that extra space?
If you can.
Right.
It's ideal. It creates more space, and even though the adjacent lane should be reduced to 60 when they're working on the shoulder of the road, even moving over to the next lane is still ideal if you can to reduce your speed just to create additional safety for the emergency worker.
And crosswalks. Let's talk about the rules of the road and the rule of law here in Alberta. Do you have to wait for the pedestrian to completely finish crossing the crosswalk before you go through that crosswalk as a driver?
Well, there is some controversy about what is the law on that. The Traffic Safety Act says basically you need to yield to the pedestrians in the crosswalk. So whatever it takes to do that, depending even sometimes the direction the pedestrian is crossing versus where you're parked or stopped, might dictate what it means to actually yield the right of way to that pedestrian.
I've also seen pedestrians, you know, halfway through you think they're going to be done and then they run back the other way. So maybe that's why it makes common sense. Use common sense to make sure they cross the entire way before you proceed.
Well, there's a few factors. Number one thing I always say when you're dealing with pedestrians in a crosswalk is do the safest thing for the pedestrian.
Makes a lot of sense. How about winter driving kits? Wayne, let's talk about how important they are and what you actually have inside of those kits.
Well, they are important, particularly where you're driving. So it's always good, even in the city, to make sure you have warm clothing along. You may have walked out of your house into the car, so you didn't really notice the elements. But if you happen to have a vehicle breakdown or someplace where you can't get to a warm place right away, having warm clothing might be important. And as well, of course, having something like booster cables, a blanket, maybe a bottle of water. Most importantly, if you're driving out of town, maybe make sure you have a fully charged cell phone to take along to communicate with somebody. And
how about some granola bars maybe to tide you over?
Something non-perishable like that is great as well, if you happen to be stranded somewhere for a period of time to keep you sustained. So that's important as well.
Flares?
Flares or even a triangle.
Oh,
okay. Get a triangle that you can put up behind your vehicle, it lets people know that you're having some kind of a problem. And of course, lets them see earlier where you are stopped on the shoulder of the road in case you weren't able to keep your lights on and that sort of thing.
How important is the battery to the life of the vehicle? And we should protect that battery, especially when the temperatures plummet to minus 25, 30, even 35 degrees.
Well, it is important. You know, it's good in the beginning of the winter season to get your car winterized. So maybe getting the battery strength checked so that you can sort of make sure you have good cranking power if you have to spend a little time getting your engine fired up.
What are we looking at, like 550 cold cranking amps, kind of a minimum?
You know, I'm not an expert on that part of it.
Some mechanics I've talked to, they say minimum 550, right?
Yeah, so it's just if you get it checked early, you probably know if you have enough cranking power to get the job done.
Well, that's good. Now, I often see vehicles with very poorly scraped windows. People will pull away, there's snow and ice in the back window, you know, lots of snow on top of the hood, and they just use their windshield wipers so they can barely see through the windshield. That creates a real danger for them with all of the blind spots and drivers around them as well, doesn't it?
Yes, it's very unsafe, really. It's best to take that extra time, clean the car off completely, including the snow off the roof, because as you start to move, the wind is going to blow it over the back of your car and probably onto the windshield of the vehicle that's traveling behind you.
And ice chunks as well, right?
And ice chunks if they are there. Anything like that could hit the other vehicle behind you. So that's not good. As well as you have to be making a lane change or scanning intersections as you approach. If your windshield is partially covered with snow, it's going to reduce the ability for you to see well.
How often do you see police pull people over that have their license plates covered in the back? I see a lot of trucks out there, when the snow comes, they don't clear that off the back of their plate. We've got some photo radar here in the city. It's like, you know what, good luck, take my picture, thanks a lot. And they keep driving, right, because it's covered.
Well, you know, that's another part of keeping the car cleaned off properly, right? We need to, legally, we should be keep making sure a license plate is visible for the very reason that any law enforcement does want to be able to read the plate.
Some people I talk to as well, Wayne, about windshield washer fluid. When you talk about winterizing your vehicle, you better make sure you take out that summer windshield washer fluid, use it all up. Otherwise, the lines will freeze. And then when it comes time you want to use it, it's not available, right?
Certainly that could happen. That's very true. So, you know, always keeping your washer fluid canister topped up. And if you're taking a highway drive somewhere, always making sure it's full before you go, and carry extra with you. So that if you have to stop somewhere, or if you get to your destination and don't have anything available, you still have a supply you could use if necessary.
How important are block heaters, you think?
Well, I mean, it depends on the vehicle sometimes. Like a lot of vehicles now with fuel injection, they a little more readily start in cold weather.
And you've got a good battery.
And a good battery.
With minimum 550 cold cranking
exactly.
amps, right?
But a block heater, of course, does reduce the stress on an engine for starting. So even if it's plugged in for an hour or so before you go to start the vehicle, it still is a big assist.
Why is it that sometimes when you turn on your heater, you know, when you're driving your vehicle in the middle of winter, all of the windows fog up and you can't see a thing? You're like, ah! And you're struggling, you're wiping them down. What is that? Is it because it's on recirculation instead of fresh air? Like, what's the problem there a lot of times?
You know, there again, it's more of a mechanics question.
Okay.
but generally speaking, you know, I find that if you have that situation, you know, crack your windows a little bit.
Okay.
And then that sort of equalizes the temperature and your windows will clear quicker.
How about fog lights? Do they really make much of a difference? Are they pretty important here in southwestern Alberta?
Well, fog lights do play a role. Primarily when we're having poor visibility, but ideally fog lights should be used with your low beams. And that just allows the driver to see the ground a little closer in front of the vehicle, say if he's driving in heavy snowfall or fog.
I've noticed as well sometimes with the plastic covers on headlights, they get a little murky, they get a little, you know, it's almost like you have to take some toothpaste, put it on there, or some Coke, and then rub it off to get that. How important is that for your headlights when you're driving at night?
Well, if it's affecting the beams of your lights as to distance that they will shine ahead of you, that's important. You know, you want to be able to see well ahead, even if you're on low beam. You know, you want to be able to see well up the road. And of course, that may affect how visible you are to somebody else as well.
How about adjusting your headlights as well? That's pretty important too, isn't it? Because sometimes people will be flashing their high beams at you, and it's like, my low beams are on. Why do they keep flashing the high beams? Because where they're adjusted, right?
Sometimes they're not adjusted correctly, and you know, the best thing there to do is if you think that that's a possibility, you can just take it into a service station and get that checked out.
Now, if you're parked outside during the cold winter temperatures, can it be a safety issue, or maybe just damaging your motor, not letting your vehicle warm up? How long should we let it warm up for? Some people let their vehicles warm up 10, 15 minutes. I'm thinking that might be a little bit of overkill.
You know, generally speaking, letting your vehicle run just enough to start clearing off the glass. The easiest way to warm up your engine once it's run shortly is to actually drive it. That's the quickest way to warm up your vehicle and get the coolant circulating.
You know, it's interesting too, Wayne, I've talked to some mechanics that say what you need to do to warm up your transmission as well, like you apply that emergency parking brake, put it in neutral, and that warms up your tranny a little bit faster as well when you have an automatic. So that was interesting too. I said, that's kind of interesting, you know, put it in neutral to warm up the transmission. So any final advice and maybe tips for our viewers now when it comes to winter driving?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be patient and realize that it might take you longer, so plan ahead. Plan early. On a bad winter's day, if you check the road report and it looks like some bad weather is coming, don't go if you don't really need to go. Stay home and maybe wait for that weather system to pass and then go. But in addition to that, if you're on the road, make sure you leave enough time and space to drive with other motorists safely.
Now, you're a driver instructor. I want to ask you, what are some of your pet peeves when you hit the highway or even the local roads here in town?
Well, there are, I think the number one is, as you mentioned, especially in the wintertime, the vehicles that aren't properly cleared off. And people just driving in the wintertime like it's summer weather and not allowing for the space and jeopardizing everybody else on the road, including themselves.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of times truckers that I've talked to, they neglect it, they forget to clean off the ice on the top of their trucks and their trailers, and those chunks, when they make their way loose, they fly off on the highway. That can cause some serious damage and threaten the other vehicles around them.
Oh, it could, for sure. And that's an additional problem for them too because of the height of that the trailer to get all that cleared off.
They climb all the way up, right?
Yeah.
Wayne McLaughlin, Chief Driving Instructor with the Alberta Motor Association. Thanks so much for joining me here in studio today.
Well, thank you for having me once again. My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.